Okay, good evening. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to talk tonight. I'm glad you look at you over there, Alan and Linda. Good to see you. I'm glad to welcome those of you who are not in our small group. So thank you for coming. Of course, I appreciate my small group, and that's why I'm in the group, because I love them and I look forward to that every week. Well, I've received a lot of texts and emails the last 4 days, 5 days, whatever. It's been 5 days now, about what's going on in the Middle East, and everybody seems to be interested in that. And so I thought, well, let's see if we can strike while the iron is hot and talk about these things. My goal tonight is to help you understand a lot of things that the news media is not going to explain to you. And if you understand these things, you'll understand what's going on, and you'll understand what's coming down the pipe. And so my goal is to be interesting. Somebody told me a long time ago, Jeff, we don't care how long you talk, just as long as you're interesting. So I hope I'm interesting one more time tonight. So in light of the terrorist attack on Israel on Saturday, October 7th, we've all been either glued to our televisions or looking at social media for news about what's going on in that country. Now, in case there is any doubt where I stand, I love Israel, I love the Jewish people, and I always will. They are God's people, and God is going to redeem his people in the future, and he has not given up on them. There are people among us who we call replacement theologians, who say all the promises that God made to Israel, he took from Israel and gave to the Gentiles, the church. That is not true. The promises that God made to Israel are just as good today as when God first started making them to Moses almost 5,000 years ago. And so I am pro-Israeli, and I want to make that very clear. Now, one other thing, I didn't write this from scratch today. I spent about 5 hours on it, but I'm pulling from stuff I've already written. And I have written extensively on most everything that I'll say tonight in a abbreviated form. So if you want something, email me, and I want to know more about the Palestinians. I want to know more about God's promise to the Jews. I want to know more about the PLO or anything that I might mention tonight. You let me know. I've written on it. I'd be glad to share that with you. So let's talk about the Muslims in general as we begin today. We'll talk about Hamas and Hezbollah. Those are not the only Arab terrorist groups in the world by a long shot. I don't know how many there are, but there's probably a couple hundred different sects of Islam that are terrorist organizations, but these are the ones that are prominent. They are in the news this week. So Hamas is a Sunni Muslim terrorist organization. It was founded in 1987 to resist the Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip. Now, the Gaza Strip is just that. It is a little strip of land between Israel and Egypt. It's 25 miles long. It's 3 to 7 miles wide. It's a very small area. The Philistines, that's where they were from, if you remember, the wars that the Israelites had with the Philistines. Samson had a lot of dealings with the Philistines. That's that little narrow strip we call Gaza today. That was Phoenicia back then, and so that's where they came from. Now, what separates Hamas and Hezbollah, what separates Sunni and Shiite Muslims is this. Hamas is a Sunni Muslim sect, and they believed that when Muhammad died in 632 AD, which was a long time ago, that they should elect a successor to Muhammad to rule what we know today as the religion of Islam. That is the Sunni Muslims. That's what the country of Iraq is. They are Sunni Muslims. Saddam Hussein, Sunni Muslim. The other group are the Shiite Muslims, and when Muhammad died in 632, they believed that one of Muhammad's own kindred from his a family line should rule over the kingdom. And so they thought that Ali, who was Muhammad's son-in-law and also a cousin, that he should be the ruler. So today you have two main Muslim groups, the Sunni Muslims and the Shia Muslims, or Shiites. And so Hamas are Sunni Muslims. And those are the ones, again, that thought they should elect a successor to Muhammad. And so both the Sunnis and Shias do not get along. Now, if you'll remember, there was a 8-year war between Iran and Iraq. Anybody remember that? 1980 to 1988, there was a war there where Saddam Hussein of Iraq attacked Iran. And that war depleted Saddam Hussein of money. That's why he invaded Kuwait. You remember the invasion of Kuwait, 1990, 1991, January, America launched Operation Desert Storm to reclaim Kuwait from the Iraqis. And so they don't like each other, except they get together in their hatred of the Jews. So they will, anything that's going to hurt the Jews, kill the Jews, whatever, they'll unite on that. But other than that, they're really different. So tonight I want to tell you that what's going on in Israel tonight should not surprise us. If you understand the prophetic teachings of Jesus, you know that Jesus predicted this very thing. When describing the conditions just before the flood, Moses wrote this: "The earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence." Now that's the passage that Jesus referred to in Matthew 24, 37 and 38, when Jesus said that the last days before his second coming to the earth would be like the days of Noah. So what were the days of Noah? They were days of violence. Secondly, Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, and the word Olivet Discourse means that Jesus taught a sermon on the Mount of Olives, which is on the east side of the city of Jerusalem. It's right up against, with a real small valley between it and with the pictures of Jerusalem you see on television all the time, with the gold dome building and all the Temple Mount. That little valley, there's a little valley there between the outside wall and the Mount of Olives. And so the Mount of Olives is right there on the eastern side, and Jesus taught his disciples things that were prophetic at the time, still prophetic today, about his second coming. And he said this in Matthew 24:6, "You will hear of war and rumors of wars, but see to it you're not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end," the Battle of Armageddon, "is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." Now, that's repeated in Mark's account of the Olivet Discourse. It's repeated in Luke 21, where Luke recorded Jesus' teaching of the Olivet Discourse. They all say virtually the same thing, that there's going to come a time when there's going to be wars and rumors of war. And obviously, I think that we are living in that time. Jesus said there's times when you will hear, and that is the tense of the verb there is present tense, and which means you will continually hear these things, because it's always the present tense, right? Now's present, now's present, now's present, now's present, and on and on. So the present tense means you will continually hear of these things, about wars breaking out, or a rumor that a war may break out. And so he talked about nations rising against nations. Those would be a country that is not ruled by a king, and then he mentions kingdoms, and that would be a country that is ruled by a king. So he's kind of using universal terms here, right? Because some have kings, some don't have kings, but there's going to be worldwide violence, wars, and rumors of war. And he said it will affect all nations. The Greek word nations there is ethnos, from which it gets the English word ethnic. Now, we know what ethnic groups are, right? And so there would not just be country fighting against country, but there would be ethnic groups within a country fighting. Think Yugoslavia. Y'all remember Yugoslavia? It was one country. And then we had this ethnic fighting and ethnic cleansing, and then it divided up into three separate racial, ethnic parts of that country. So since Cain killed his brother Abel in Genesis chapter 4, there's been about 15,000 wars. 15,000. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in world history. At least 180 million people died in war in the 20th century. That is a lot of people. A lot of people. Dan Smith, in his book on war, said that since the end of World War II, well, that's not all that long ago. It just seems like, you know, it wasn't that long ago, but certainly it has been 75 years or so. There have been more than 300 wars since the Second World War. Of course, if you remember your history, you know that the First World War was called the War of the End All Wars, right? Well, that didn't happen. And the Second World War, that wasn't the end of war when we've had 300 wars. And he goes on to say, there has been not one single day free of war somewhere in the world since World War II. So, you know, we're living in a time of violence and wars and rumors of war. So that's why it shouldn't surprise us that things like this happen, because Jesus predicted that it would, and it has, and it will, and it will again. Now, we want to talk more about Hamas right now, because they're the ones that are causing the problems at the present time. So the West Bank, now the West Bank, Israel has given up parts of her land for peace, trying to buy peace with the Arabs through giving away their land. And if you looked at a map of Israel today, a modern day map, you will see the West Bank. And it is an area that's south and west of Jerusalem, clear over to the east, and then Jericho, and matter of fact, south of Jerusalem goes clear up to Bethlehem. Bethlehem used to be 5 or 6 miles south of Jerusalem, but it's all kind of grown together now, the cities. But so from Bethlehem, southwest, southeast, then up to Jericho, and on up. It's West Bank means the west bank of the Jordan River. Okay, that's all the West Bank means. So the Israelis have given that to the Palestinians to try to buy peace. Has it worked? Will it work? Never. Now, so that's what the West Bank and Gaza. So you're hearing about Gaza, but there's been some drone attacks in the West Bank. The Hamas is using drones, and they went, I don't know how many miles, 20 miles maybe into the West Bank, and they were attacking settlements there. So the problem with the Palestinians is that they have an insatiable appetite for violence. And I heard on the radio coming over here tonight that someone, as a senator, U.S. senator, said the problem today is with Hamas, not the Palestinians. As if the Palestinians are angels. And let me assure you, I've written extensively on this. If you want to know the history of the Palestinians and how they came to be, where they came from, and all of this claims to the land that they say that land is theirs, all of those claims are debunked in light of history and the Word of God. But let me tell you, the Palestinians they are sewer rats. They are so bad that the Egyptians kicked the Palestinians out of Egypt. They fled to Jordan. They are so evil, the Jordanians didn't want them in their country. They kicked them out of Jordan. Then they went up into Lebanon, and they were so bad up there, Lebanon was kicking them out. And so they had to do some creative thinking because they didn't have any place to go. And so the Palestinians thought, who do our Arab brothers hate more than they hate us? Oh, I know, the Jews. And they played the Jew card. And that's how they ended up in Gaza. Reader's Digest, I've got the details in print if you want all that. But so the Palestinians may not be the ones that are spearheading this, but they are certainly not any choir boys for sure. Now, the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, ruled Gaza and the West Bank until the death of Yasser Arafat in 2004. At that time, Gaza and the West Bank had an election, and they elected a member of the Hamas party to rule that area. So right now, the rulers of Gaza and the West Bank is the Hamas. Now, the problem that the Hamas found when they became leaders of the government, Palestinian government, was that there was no money. That should be a real shock to us, you know, that you got this evil dictator, Yasser Arafat, and he's taking the money that the world is sending him, and he's putting it in Swiss bank accounts, and we're sending food and medical care, medical supplies, and all kinds of other things to him. He's selling that to other countries, sticking the money in his pocket, and he died a gazillionaire, but he's still in hell tonight. That money didn't do him any good. But the country was broke when Hamas came on the scene, and they were elected because they promised two things. Number one, to clean up the corruption in government. Okay, I've just explained about Arafat, corrupt. Number two, they pledged to destroy Israel. So the people voted for him, and that's how Hamas got into power in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Now, this is when their relationship with Iran ramped up. Now, I know you hear on the news that Iran is the puppet master pulling the strings, and you'll hear some people say, no, that's not true. And I want to tell you, it is true, and it has been true since 2004. And, you know, it's well documented if you want to do the research that they are. And so the Iran came to the aid of Hamas and guaranteed they'd fully fund Hamas, a practice that continues to this day. Now, when I conclude with talking about Hamas, this is very important. I want you to hear this. When describing the conditions of the world before the flood, I said about 5 minutes ago, in Noah's day, Moses described the world as corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. Now, the Hebrew word for violence in Genesis 6:11 is Hamas. The word in Hebrew means cruel violence. What an apt name for this group of people. Cruelly violent. That's what Hamas means in Hebrew. So now let's talk about Hezbollah for a few minutes. And Hezbollah is the group in southern Lebanon. And they are a terrorist group too, and they're not nice guys either. And they are entrenched in southern Lebanon. They claim to have 100,000 troops and 1,500 missiles aimed at Israel. And so there has been several missiles fired from Hezbollah into Israel since Saturday. There have been several border skirmishes between them, but nothing major has broken out as yet. Of course, the Israelis are hoping that it does not, because they will have to fight a war on two fronts, in the south, basically, and in the north. And this is nothing new for the Israelis. I've written extensively about all of the wars of Israel, which are very interesting because God has miraculously preserved the Jews in their land since May 14, 1948, when Israel declared themselves to be a nation. Right away, they were attacked by their Arab neighbors, so there was a war of 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, and the Intifada in the 1990s. And the word Intifada is a $2 word that means the uprising. There was, and you see it all the time. If you watch the news and you're familiar with Jerusalem, you'll see it all the time. There's violence on the Temple Mount, and they're throwing rocks and killing each other and all that kind of stuff. That's the Intifada. It's the uprising within Israel of Arabs that are in that particular country. So Hezbollah was founded in 1982 by Muslim clerics. And what happened, I don't know if you remember or not, but the Muslims took over the land of Lebanon. Lebanon was a Christian country. It was the, what do they call it? The Riviera of the Mideast. Was a beautiful country until the Arabs got it. If you've ever been to an Arab country, and I've been to many, they're not clean, they're dirty, they're trashy, and it just literally destroyed the Riviera of the Mideast that country. And so they came in and they took over, the Muslims took over, and how did they do it? Here's what happened. Now this is a history lesson for America. If you want to know the future of America, if Jesus doesn't come, I'm about to tell you. You look at Lebanon, what happened in Lebanon is going to happen here. So, the Christians are controlling the government and the country of Lebanon, and Muslims started moving in, and they were being persecuted, they were being deprived, they didn't have full citizenship, and the Christians went to the government officials and got laws passed to protect the Muslims and give them rights. And so the Muslims began to grow, they began to get elected to office, and pretty soon there's more people in government that are Muslim than Christian, and then the Muslims turned on the Christians and persecuted them and took away their rights, burned their churches and all kinds of things. And the Christians said, wait, we're the ones that stood up for you. We're the ones that defended you. Yeah, that was pretty stupid. And we're in control now, and you are not in control any longer. So it's coming to America. I've read 3 studies that say by 2050, America will be a Muslim nation. And you need to just do a little research on the state of Minnesota and the state of Michigan, and you look what's going on up there, because Muslims by the tens of thousands have moved in up there, and they're trying to implement Sharia law, and Sharia law is Muslim law, and they got all of these laws, and you poor women, you're going to be a second-class citizen, and you can never look your husband in the eye. You can never go outside without wearing a burqa or some kind of a veil over your face. Your testimony in court will be half that of a man. Your husband can divorce you by saying, I divorce you 3 times, but you can never divorce your husband. Listen, that's Sharia law. It's coming to America, and they're fighting for it up there in Minnesota. Now, just in case you forgot, OAC and her sister there in Congress, they're from that state. And they are anything but what we are and what we believe. So the Hezbollah has been around since 1982. They've done so many evil things around the world that it would be a list at least a foot long. They're not choir boys by any means, shape, or form. So what is the goal of the Palestinians, Hamas, Hezbollah, or any of this? What is their goal? And I want to read what Edwin Locke, Dean Professor of Leadership at the University of Maryland, he wrote, and this is so true, the fundamental goal of the Palestinians is destruction. And that applies to Hamas and applies to Hezbollah too. They want their terrorist attacks to lead to retaliation. Now pay close attention. This is going to tell you the blueprint. This is going to tell you what Hamas is doing. Okay, destruction is the goal. They want their terrorist attacks to lead to retaliation so that more of their people will become terrorists, so that more killing takes place, and so on, in an endless cycle of violence resulting in death to as many people as possible. Why such seething nihilism? Consider that when the Jews came to Palestine, it was a desert. Matter of fact, it wasn't just a desert, it was also a swamp. If you've ever read Mark Twain's account of his visit to the Holy Land, A Stranger in Search of, I dropped the name of the book, but he wrote about it being a marsh, a swamp, when he was there. People were living in the same primitive manners they had since the time of Moses. The Jews brought Western knowledge and values to the Middle East. They turned a barren land into a modern industrialized civilization. They raised cities where there'd only been dirt. They developed irrigated farms, and they irrigate using salt water injected at the roots. That's pretty smart. They developed and irrigated farms where there only been dry sand. They built cars and trucks and planes. And I might add, they're the leading manufacturer of medical equipment in the world. They brought all of these forms of transportation where there had been mainly pack animals. They produced wealth where there had only been poverty. They brought freedom and individual rights to a land where these ideas were unknown. So Palestinians, Hamas, Hezbollah want to kill all the Jews, and they want to take the land for which they didn't pay for anything. I guess that's a good gig if you get it, but nobody's ever handed anything to me. You probably say the same thing for you. So that's what their goal is. So the real issue in the Middle East is not about land. It's about religion. The religion of Islam murdering Jews. I don't know if you heard it on the news today, but there's demonstrations, of course, I guess you figured out, all over cities all over the world, college campuses all over America. And one group today that I heard on the news was chanting, send the Jews to the gas ovens. Well, I don't know, but that's about the worst thing a person I think could ever say about the Jewish people. Horrible, horrible thing. But anti-Semitism is going to become greater and greater as time goes on, because the greatest act of anti-Semitism will happen during the tribulation period, when the Antichrist kills probably most of the Jews. Well, the Bible tells us he's going to kill 2/3 of the Jews alive on earth at the time. And how many are alive today? Well, it's about 16, 17 million. So it's a lot of folks, a lot more than the Holocaust, and the Holocaust was horrible. So the war is not about Hamas's rights, Hezbollah's rights, Palestinians' rights, the Arabs' right. It's about the right of Israel to exist. They do not want one Jew left alive on the planet. Okay, so now why do so many Muslim men become terrorists? I think it's an important question to answer. Why do they? Well, first of all, the religion of Islam, like many works-oriented religion, a works-oriented religion is a religion where you do good deeds hoping to earn your way into heaven. Now, of course, they don't call it heaven, they call it paradise, whatever you want to call eternity. You do good works. And the idea is that on Judgment Day, all your good works are put in one side of the scale, and your bad deeds are put in another, and whichever way the scale tips, that's where you'll go. So if you got more good deeds than bad, you would go to paradise, and in the Islam theology, more bad deeds than good, you go to hell. Now, this is a religion that has no security. You never know if you've been good enough to go. And that's the problem with all works-oriented religions, because there's no quote in the Bible that says, pray with 500 people. Read the Bible to people who cannot read. 60 people who cannot read. It doesn't have any kind of quota. So how do you ever know if you've done enough? Well, you never do. So all your life you live in secret fear that you've never done enough. That's not the way God intended for us to live. But in Islam, it's that way. And so in Islam theology, you could have 99 good works and only one bad work, and Allah was in a bad mood on Judgment Day, and he sent you to hell anyway. So there's this whole religion of fear, no security, no certainty, except if you become a martyr. If you die in a holy war, that's called a jihad. This is why they're signing up, because listen to what they're promised here. Now, in the Muslim theology, after death, everyone goes to the grave and awaits a resurrection in the future. That's Seventh-day Adventist theology, and some others, we don't believe that. Everyone except those who die a martyr's death in a jihad will go to the grave immediately after death and wait till the resurrection. Only person that goes immediately to paradise is a martyr, dying in a jihad, a suicide bomber. They go immediately. Okay, you're beginning to see here, I'm laying out the benefits of being a martyr here in their theology. As I'm about to describe the Muslim idea of paradise, think about how they live. Not a lot of good water, almost no medical care, not a lot of food to eat. They're living in a desert. And so think about that. And then that's why paradise appeals so much to them. So here in Muslim theology, paradise is described as a beautiful green garden where Muslims live in mansions, many rivers, shade. Well, you think about that, a river and shade in desert land. That's pretty attractive, isn't it? All the available fruit to eat you want, plenty of meat to eat, plenty to drink, rivers of honey, rivers of milk. Everyone sits on thrones of gold and precious stones. Everyone will wear green and gold silk robes. That has fountains, pavilions, mansions. You can drink from a stream of delicious wine with no intoxicating effects. Fresh young men to satisfy your homosexual desires. A place of joy, peace, satisfaction, and bliss, and all of this is eternal. So I could see why that might appeal to people who live like they live. But here's the caveat that makes men sign up to be martyrs, fight in a holy war, suicide bombers. Each Muslim martyr killed in a holy war, like what's going on right now. This is a holy war. Imam declared it a holy war. So every Muslim who dies thinks they're going straight to paradise. They are promised, these martyrs, that they will live in an ivory palace that contains 70 houses, and in each house is a fair-skinned, black-eyed virgin who regains her virginity after each sexual encounter. So that's where they get the 70 virgins, each one living in a different house inside this huge mansion. These perpetual virgins never age. They recline on green pillows and sit on luxurious carpets, eager to provide eternal and unbridled sexual pleasures. The believer in paradise will marry 500 perpetual virgins, 4,000 virgins, and 8,000 divorced women. You know what this all is? This appeals to the carnality of the unsaved man, does it not? And this is a religion of unsaved men. It's appealing to young men, 20 to 30 years old primarily. At the time in their life when their sexual drive is at the highest, all of this is very appealing to unsaved people. Now, that's not all. Listen to what else the martyrs are promised. They're promised that their family will be taken care of. The father of every suicide bomber or every person killed in a jihad is given 10,000 American dollars at the wake of his martyred son. $10,000. A free college education is given to all the martyrs' siblings. Plenty of food for his family to eat. Medical care is promised that is not available to anybody but the rich and the politically elected people. Streets and buildings are named in their memory, and the day of their martyrdom becomes a holiday on the Arab calendar. Now do you see why Muslims are lining up to go into a holy war, to wear a suicide vest, because they're promised all of these things. Now, since we're in a holy war, let's talk about it. The holy war is called a jihad. I'm sure you've heard that term, J-I-H-A-D, jihad. And they are declared by a Muslim cleric called imam. And he will declare that a certain activity is now a holy war. So the whole thing that bothers me is that I often hear people say that Islam is a religion of peace. We're not for war, we are for peace. But what they don't tell you, the fine print, that can get you in trouble. The fine print says that it's a religion of peace to those who submit to Allah. It's a religion of violence to those who do not submit to Allah. And that's what it's all about. And a jihad is a way of spreading Islam. Well, if you've studied the life of Muhammad, And you know, I don't have any good things to say about Muhammad. And I do. And by the way, if you want to know all about Islam, I've written extensively on it. Learn all about Muhammad, his life, how the religion of Islam came to be, what they believe, and all that stuff. I asked for that. But the way that Islam is spread is through war. That's how it all started. Muhammad led raiding parties on caravans and stole the goods the caravans were taking from one place to another. That's how it all started. And the war just kept coming. And of course, if you studied your history, you know that it swept across Africa and across the Middle East and into Europe. And it was a religion that was advanced by killing infidels. Now, an infidel is anyone who is not Muslim. It's not Muslim. So that means us here. We're all infidels in their eyes. And what should happen to infidels? They should all be killed. And there is some kind of special reward given for killing infidels in paradise. All right, so let's talk about what happened and what's coming next here. Islamic theology tells us. Islam teaches there are 3 waves to a jihad. 3 waves. You saw the first wave last Saturday. The first wave is a surprise terrorist attack. Now, what happened to the World Trade Centers and the Pentagon back in 2001? That was the first wave of a jihad. It was shock. Were we not shocked? That was absolutely, without a doubt, the worst day of my life. I took that to heart. Those were my people. They were invading my country. I took it very personal and still do today. So, what happened last Saturday? First wave of the jihad, a surprise attack on the infidels. Who are the infidels again? Anybody that's not Muslim. Jew, Christian, whatever. Buddhist, whatever. So, the second wave of a jihad is vulnerability. Now, after the shock, they wait to see how we respond. And if you respond with authority and power and might, well, they shut her down. If you respond weakly, they know you're a weak nation, a weak leader, and then they come right back at you again. Now, back in 2001, and you can talk, this is not talking politics, this is just plain fact. We had a president, George W. Bush, who stood up and said, we're not going to tolerate this. And they believed him. So the question today is, we better pray that our president is strong. Benjamin Netanyahu is strong. But I know who Benjamin Netanyahu is, don't you? I mean, he was a military officer, you know, in the 67 war and the 73 war. That man is a warrior. In his country, he's a military hero. So I know how Benjamin Netanyahu is going to react. So, vulnerability. And the third and final, and this is going to explain what's going on right now. The third wave of the jihad is humiliation. Do you know why they are beheading babies? Do you know why they're burning people, setting them on fire in their beds? Because it's the third wave of jihad. It's to humiliate your enemies. I can think of nothing that I've ever heard in my life that has made me as sick to my stomach is what I've heard these evil people are doing to babies, women, children, and everybody innocent. Those 260 young people at a music festival well, there was probably more than that, but they slaughtered 260. This is what they do, folks. They've got a plan. It's outlined, and that was a humiliation part of that. They did the worst thing that could be done. And friend, I want to tell you something, and I'll fight you before I take it back. If your religion promotes the killing of innocent people and babies, your religion is wrong. It's wrong. America must stand up against Muslim terrorism every single time, or we will be their next target again. And I'll be honest with you, I'm afraid. That screen door we have is a border on the southern part of our country. That scares me. And I wrote as early as 2005 and quoting military leaders and what has happened. Terrorists have come through that border, and our government acknowledges it. Not to you, but they acknowledge it in the Homeland Security Bulletin. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And so there are already terrorists in America, and some of our leaders believe there are nuclear bombs that have been smuggled in, because when the communism fell in Russia, remember when communism fell in East Germany and Eastern Europe and Russia in 89 to 91, depends on which country, but it was in that time frame. 17 nuclear suitcase bombs from Russia came up missing, and our military believes several of those were smuggled into the United States. But you know, you don't have to have a nuclear bomb to stir up things. I mean, you can take your car and drive it into a gas station, you know, and create a explosion. You know, you don't have to, or put stuff in people's water supplies. And so, I mean, it doesn't, you don't have to have a nuclear weapon to cause a lot of chaos in our country. And I'm afraid, I'm really afraid that if Jesus doesn't come, we may see some of that. So, I want to mention one other thing. Why all the violence? Why the wars that the Arabs are involved in? Because in their theology, again, they believe that their Messiah is coming. Now remember, I told you there's two main Islamic groups, the Sunnis and the Shias. Okay? So they both believe the same thing about the coming Messiah. They just believe the name is different. They call him by different names. So the Sunni Muslims, Iraq, Saddam Hussein, that bunch, they call their coming Messiah Mahdi, M-A-H-D-I, Mahdi. They believe he is their coming universal savior. The Shiite Muslims use a different term. They call him the 12th Imam. Again, Imam, it means cleric in our vernacular preacher. The 12th Imam. But when you study, and in my notes, not these notes, but other notes if you want it, I show you what we call eschatology, the study of prophecy in Islam. And I will list for you there all of the characteristics of their coming Messiah. And the interesting thing is that almost everything they say about their coming Messiah, the Bible used to describe the Antichrist. Now that's interesting. So, that's why there is so much violence and so many wars, because they believe that out of chaos will come their Messiah. We've got to create chaos so our Messiah can come and save the world out of it and sit upon his throne and rule the world. This is how these people think. And if you understand how they think, you're going to understand why they're starting wars all the time. You're going to understand why these guys are signing up to be martyrs and go out and fight in a jihad and become terrorists. It's because they believe it benefits them and their family. That's why they're doing it. So what does the future of Israel hold? You know, the Bible does not address what's presently going on in Israel, you know, the big letdown. And, you know, I've studied prophecy seriously since 1972, you know, and in my studies, there's nothing about this. There's no way I can plug it in except one, and I'll get to that in a minute. And so I did a check with my 12 go-to guys on prophecy, and about 10 of them said nothing, and the other 2 said, I don't know. You're going to get the same message from all the prophecy people I trust. Now, there's a lot of nuts out there that make up all this nonsense, and they're wrong all the time, and they don't lack for followers. I don't know how you keep following the guy who says this is going to happen, it doesn't happen. I don't get that, you know. Because in the Old Testament, the test of a prophet was he always told the truth, and if he didn't, he was to be stoned to death. So I don't follow these guys that are wrong all the time. Now, what did Zechariah say? And I want you to listen to this, because this is very important, because this tells us about the future of Israel. Zechariah 12, 1-9. Zechariah chapter 12, verses 1-9. This is the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Okay, we got God's word on this. Okay, this is not Jeff speaking. This is not some prophecy speaker. Speaker. This is the word of the Lord. The Lord, Yahweh, personal name God, who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundation of the earth, and who forms the spirit of man within him, declares. So the God who created it all, you got something you need to hear. I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Zechariah says that in the last days, Jerusalem is going to become the center of the world. Not Washington, D.C., not New York City, not London, Paris, or any other city. It's going to be Jerusalem is going to become the center of the world. He says Judah. Now again, remember, the nation was divided into 3 parts. In the north, Galilee. In the middle, Samaria. And in the south, Judah. And where we're talking about these attacks happening are in Judah. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. And on that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, against Israel, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. Point, Israel's not going anywhere. Second point, and the bad news is that a lot of Jewish people are going to die. And that bothers me. A lot of them have already died. And a lot more are going to die. Not just in this skirmish, but in all of those up till the end of time. On that day, I, the Lord, will make strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness, declares the Lord. I will keep a watchful eye over the house of Judah. And he goes on in verse 6, Jerusalem will remain intact in her place. And verse 8, on that day, the Lord will shield those who live in Jerusalem. The idea is that once Israel comes back to her land, she's going to be there forever. That's what Amos said, Amos 9, 14 and 15. I, Yahweh, will bring back my exiled people Israel from the nations of the world where they've been scattered. Verse 15, and I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I, Yahweh, have told them. Israel's not going anywhere. That's the good news. Bad news, a lot are going to die. What about the future of the Arabs? This is interesting. Psalm 83:1. Psalm 83:1. The psalmist prays, "O God, don't sit idly by, silent and inactive. Don't you hear the tumult of your enemies?" I mean, that could have been said right now today, the prayers of the Jewish people. God, don't you hear the noise? Tumult means noise. Don't you hear the noise of our enemies over there? Don't you see what your arrogant enemies are doing? God, they're not just our enemies, they're your enemies. Now in the context I'm about to read, it's the Arab nations. So that's who they is, and you'll see I'm telling you the truth in just a minute. These Arab nations devise crafty schemes against your people, Israel, laying plans against your precious ones. Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence. Man, that's the Palestinians and what they've been saying for decades. Their charter says that the goal of the Palestinians Liberation Organization is to drive the Israelis into the sea, meaning the Mediterranean Sea. He goes on and he says, we will destroy the very memory of its existence. This was their unanimous decision. Man, they're all in on this. You know, they fight each other, but when it comes to Israel, what did I tell you? Oh, they come together for that. They signed a treaty as allies against you, God. Now here he starts listing these Arab families. The Edomites, descendants of Esau. Ishmaelites, descendants of Ishmael. The Moabites, descendants of Lot's oldest daughter. The Hagarites, descendants of Hagar. Remember the wife, Sarah's handmaids. There we go, I'll get it. Descendants. The Gebalites, that's the Lebanese. The Ammonites, that's the descendants of Lot by his youngest daughter. The Amalekites, that's the descendants of Esau. You remember Jacob and Esau. And the people from Philistia, that's the Philistines, Gaza Strip. And Tyre, that's in Lebanon, southern Lebanon. Assyria, that's the Syrians. And the Syrians have been, throwing some stuff over the border too. And they have allied with the descendants of Lot. Do, God, with them as you did to the Midianites. Judges, book of Judges. God destroyed the Midianites. And he goes on and he said, these enemies of God, let us seize for our own use the pasture lands of God. You remember a while ago when I was quoting from that guy who said the purpose of the Arabs was to destroy the Jews and they wanted to take over a land that they'd not worked for? That's what that says right here. They say, let us seize for our own use the pasture lands of God. And then the psalmist prays, make them failures in everything they do until they learn that you alone are called the Lord, that you alone are the Most High, supreme over all the earth. These people have been the perennial enemies of God for a very long time. If Abraham had done what was right, his faith would have been strong and he would have trusted God to make Sarah's womb come alive, we wouldn't be having the problems we're having today. Well, let me see. I am almost done. Yes, I am. Okay, today, Israel. Tomorrow, us. This week, so far this week, Hamas has not targeted America or any terrorist acts outside the country of Israel. But if anyone tells you that Hamas is not active in the United States, they are ignorant. If a government official tells you that there are no Hamas cells in the United States, they are lying. Jeff, that's a pretty strong statement. Oh, I got pretty strong evidence to back it up. When I was pastoring in Dallas, I had 12 law enforcement officers in my church, from the Dallas County Sheriff's Department to Dallas City policemen to Dallas City detectives and so on. They slipped me the Homeland Security Bulletin on a regular basis. Now, they could have lost their jobs for doing that. It's published regularly. It updates the law enforcement people on any kind of terrorist activity or possible terrorist activity in America. In 2005, is that 18 years ago? Is that math right? I became a preacher because I couldn't do math, so I'm not sure. Maybe 18 years ago. In 2005, the Department of Homeland Security Bulletin said, and I had it in my possession, there were Hamas terrorist cells in the following 13 U.S. cities: Dallas, Houston, Columbia, Mississippi, Kansas City, Missouri, Chicago, Detroit, New York City, Washington, Springfield, Virginia, Santa Clara, California, Los Angeles, California, Tucson, Arizona, and Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They are here. And they're waiting. And we will soon pay for our lack of vigilance. Remember what I said. Today, Israel. Tomorrow, the United States. In conclusion, I really don't see any significant biblical prophecies fulfilled at this time. However, I think that one thing is clear about what's going on. It is going, I'm going to read it so I won't say it wrong. At the very least, this war will contribute to the world's frustration with the endless conflict in the Middle East. Meaning that the world will not tolerate much more unrest in the Middle East, and this sets the table for the Antichrist, who's going to come on the scene and make a peace treaty that will protect Israel from her enemies. A 7-year peace treaty. Daniel 9, 26 and 27 is where the Bible talks about that. So, I think that Israel will take care of business. They always do. And again, study the wars that she's been in. Israel has been miraculously preserved by God. And it's really interesting reading if you want that, all of that information. Very interesting how they were outnumbered by huge numbers. And how one tank fought off a division of tanks, stuff like that. It just never happens unless God is there. These are God's people. God said they were his people. And God hadn't changed his mind. And you know, the Abrahamic covenant, and I got a whole message on the Abrahamic covenant, and I'll tell you, God made a covenant, promise or agreement with Abraham, and said that he who blesses you, the Jews, I will bless, but he who curses you, I will curse. I have a message that is extremely interesting where America has pressured Israel to give up land for peace, where America has turned against Israel, and show you that within 3 days, every single time we did that, God sent a judgment on America. Very interesting reading about 65 different things. The Abrahamic covenant is in effect. Britain broke it during World War II. Britain used to be the country on whom the sun never set. They were a worldwide conglomeration of nations. Now the only reason they're a first-rate nation today is because they're in the nuclear club. If they weren't in a nuclear club, they'd be a second-rate nation because they broke the Abrahamic covenant. Germany broke the Abrahamic covenant. God broke them down. And there's all kinds of nations that have broken it, and God's punished them, and God's been punishing America for breaking it, and we better not now. And these people that are demonstrating, especially the young people, you know, I tell college people when I talk to them, I say, you know, I'm not smarter than you are. A lot of you got higher IQ than I do. I'm not as talented as you are. A lot of you can do a lot of things better than I can. But I'll tell you the difference between you and me, it's one word. It's experience. It's experience. I've had some experience. I've seen some things. I've traveled in 70 countries of the world. I've been around. I've seen a lot of things. And I've learned a lot of things. And I want to tell you that this bothers me greatly when I see all these college campuses and these demonstrations that are pro-Hamas, anti-Israel. We can't turn our back on Israel. We do. No more America. We're just a page in a history book of a bygone era. So pray for America that we will not become anti-Semitic. Well, I preached or spoke for an hour, and I know those chairs are hard, and this was not much softer than the one you got. Any questions before we leave tonight?
Shut it off before the questions. Don't you think?
Go ahead.